hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. I know it's a little long, but honestly, I promise you lots of gems in this one. Remember to subscribe to the show and share this episode with family and friends whom you think can benefit from it. I'm sure you'll have a list of them because what we talk about today is so relevant to many people. Have you heard of the term intuitive eating? Now, you must be wondering, is it a type of diet or is it just a fancy term for mindful eating? Well, for those of you unfamiliar, the term was coined in 1995 and it offers an unconventional approach to eating that follows natural bodily cues like hunger and satisfaction. And it has helped many people heal their relationship with food. You'll hear a lot more about this in today's episode, and we're so lucky to have as our guest the OG and pioneer in this field. She's the author of 10 books and has trained countless of intuitive eating counselors worldwide, shaping the landscape of nutritional counseling as we know it today. Now, our guest today is Evelyn Tribole. She's an acclaimed expert in intuitive eating, and she and I talk about intuitive eating 101, the principles, the challenges, the misconceptions. We also speak about her illustrious career journey and how she embodies an active lifestyle in her 60s. And lastly, don't forget to hit the share button that you see on your screen so you don't miss out on future episodes. Enjoy. I'm so curious to know what got you into the topic of intuitive eating. How did you specialize in such a specific area?
Well, actually, we created the area. That was my co-founder, Elise Rush. And basically, we were two dietitians in California specializing in eating disorders, but also working with other people. And we were seeing so much suffering with people dieting. And our traditional training wasn't serving us. So we did a couple of things. We did an analysis of the research. We factored in our clinical experience and then some also popular books written by therapists. And together, we came up with this model, intuitive eating. And where we got really lucky is when we submitted our manuscript, our publisher loved it, I'm happy to say, but they said, we need to make it more how to, can you turn this into steps or something? And so we turned it into 10 principles. And the fortunateness of that was that a researcher read the book and loved it and thought, I think we can make an assessment because 10 of something is measurable. And so what happened is Tracy Tilka created this assessment and it put intuitive eating on the research map that really added validity. So we can say when we started this concept of intuitive eating, it was research inspired, but now there's over 200 studies on our work showing benefit, especially with mental health.
Now, could you share with me more about what the research space looks like then?
Yeah, it's really, really exciting. Probably one of the most significant studies came out a year and a half ago, and it was a meta-analysis study in which they looked at 92 studies on intuitive eating and asked, what are the psychological correlates? In other words, what does intuitive eating help with, and what might intuitive eating protect? And what they found is intuitive eating was really helpful with mental well-being, with mood. It was protective against eating disorders, especially binge eating. And so, what this really did is really validated our work on a much deeper level. And so I'm very, very excited about that. Other research that's come out, there's been intervention studies, again, showing a lot of benefit with, especially with mental health and ease of eating. There was another study looking at 14 studies of intuitive eating. And I don't know if your listeners know all the principles, but one of the principles, one of the most misunderstood is making peace with food. And that is, basically all foods can fit. And critics who are not familiar with our model will say, oh my gosh, if you let people eat whatever they want to, they're going to be unhealthy. And actually, what this study showed is that people who were doing either intuitive eating or some non diet based intervention where they're listening to their bodies, they either improved their eating or it stayed the same. In other words, it didn't get worse. And so it's like, yay, on that. And so
Awesome.
those are a couple of the key studies I think to keep in mind, that this is not just some idea. I mean, what started off as an idea, but there's actually a lot of validity to it. And then, the thing that's so fascinating to me is when we start looking even at social media, the fact that there's over 2 billion with the B hashtags on TikTok alone shows that there's interest, but with that interest comes confusion. And so it's like good news, bad news, and so when someone is confused about intuitive eating or they're not sure what it is, I like to first ask, well, what do you think intuitive eating is? And then I'll say, let's say they have some misunderstandings. I'll say, well, it makes sense given what's out there in the social media, but can I explain, what it actually is from our perspective? So
I'm going to ask some questions about the principles a little later on. But first, for our listeners, what is intuitive eating?
Basically, it's a mind body approach where you're the expert of your experiences. Only you know what satisfaction feels like. Only you know what will satisfy your hunger. Only you know what foods taste good, and so forth. And so rather than outsourcing your eating decisions to some guru, some influencer, some food plan of some sort, you connect with your body. And the thing that ends up happening is the more you outsource your eating decisions, it creates more and more disruption with trust. I work with a lot of really, really smart people where they'll say in essence, I can count the macro of a single pea, but I don't know how to eat. And part of that, what that is it has to do with self connection. And intuitive eating is really an inside job connecting. And anytime you go outside, you are moving away from your body and you're moving away from that connection. So it becomes really, really powerful. And probably the biggest feedback we get is that people just can't get over how much brain space or mind space was taken up with all the dieting, or if you're not dieting, just rules around eating, eat this, not that. And it's a lot of this background anxiety. And then boom, there's this ease of eating, the ease of being with people. You're actually present. So instead of sitting at a meal, counting whatever you're counting or figuring out what you're not going to do or what you're going to do afterwards, you're actually there, and connecting with whoever it is that you're talking to. And so many times, what ends up happening because of diet culture, it's really easy to get self absorbed. And when you get self absorbed about the rules of some kind of diet or some kind of food, you're not connecting with your friends and loved ones. So it's a fascinating journey that to help you take you out of that pathway of suffering from diet culture.
Oh, that's 100%, Evelyn. And I really resonate with that. All of us have this inner committee in us. I mean, I don't even know how it entered, but all of us have it.
Right? Yeah.
I didn't let it in. But so let's chat a little bit about the basic principles of intuitive eating that
Okay.
one must know about before beginning their journey. What are those?
I'm going to state what they are, and before I do that, I want to emphasize you don't have to go in any particular order, but when you write a book, you do need to go in an order. And so the first principle, and I always get the order all mixed up because when I'm working with my patients, I use whatever makes sense for them at the time. So the first principle is reject diet culture or reject the diet mentality. And that's to acknowledge that, we've been sold kind of a bill of lies that that dieting works. And actually a body of research shows not only does dieting not work, it actually predicts more weight gain, and it causes harm. It increases something called weight cycling, which you gain and lose, and usually you're escalating up. And with weight cycling, there are a bunch of health risks that come with that: cardiovascular risk, insulin resistance, and other kinds of things. And so instead of getting angry at yourself for not, quote, being able to do it, you get angry at the at diet culture and the diet companies and so on. And it's the only area in which a consumer is blamed for something not working. And so we're kind of turning this upside down. And for those out there listening thinking, I'm not so sure about this, that's also completely normal too, since diet culture is everywhere. It's the water that we are swimming in. Sometimes I think it's just kind of helpful just to start noticing. I invite you to notice, where do you see diet culture sneaking into your life, even when it's not intentional? Maybe it's at school, maybe it's at the gym, maybe it's at your places of worship and so forth. It's surprising how inundated we are with that. So rejecting the diet mentality or rejecting diet culture is a biggie, and really realizing that diets don't work and can lead to eating disorders and loss of control eating and so forth, and this profound disconnection. Then there is honoring your hunger. Hunger is a normal and natural body cue. It's not something to be tricked. It's not something to be feared. I can't tell you the amount of people I've worked with when I ask what the relationship is with hunger. I've had patients say, I'm terrified of hunger. And so my response is, oh, so what do you do? And they try to avoid it, distract themselves, trick. And what ends up happening is predictable. The hunger gets really intense. It gets into this place of what we call primal hunger, where uh, no matter what your intention is, it's so powerful. It's like, get out of my way, or I'm going to eat you along with this yummy meal, and so forth. So it's honoring hunger. Related to that is honoring fullness. And it's a recognition that our body has ways of knowing when to eat and when to stop eating. And as I'm saying this, I want to emphasize this is not about precision. This is not pass or fail. This is the journey of discovery. And so let's say you ate past fullness. That doesn't mean you blew it. Let's use that experience to see what happens. Let's say you ate a lunch and you just got really preoccupied and next thing you know, you are super full. And instead of vowing to skip a meal or something, let's see what your body does. Maybe the afternoon in which you normally get hungry, maybe that hunger is not there, and let's see how your body can actually naturally work with this. And so what happens, a lot of people might panic or they get reactive that they need to do something, and when they do that, they do so at the expense of not seeing that, oh, my body can really naturally self-regulate. Another principle related, and it's actually the hub of intuitive eating, is aiming for satisfaction when you're eating. And actually, I often start here with the principle. So if any of you are curious and want to start, I love starting at this place because it's pleasurable, it's pleasant, and it's so personal. So what would be, for example, a satisfying meal to you? What would the conditions be to make it satisfying? The taste, the temperature, the texture, and so forth. How do you want to feel when you finish the meal? Do you need a meal that's going to sustain you for a longer period of time, or maybe you've got some big talk or big project and you don't want to still be digesting your food when you're doing those kinds of things? And as you get to know your body, you can start to do that. And so the thing that is so interesting is that aiming for satisfaction helps you to get into balance, because ultimately it's not satisfying to undereat and it's not satisfying to eat past comfortable fullness. So it's a very nice way to start to connect with eating. And one of the things I like to mention is environment. And so if you think about maybe what like your all-time favorite meal would be, and think about, what it would taste like and how amazing it is. And now imagine that same amazing meal and you are in a fight with your best friend or you're in a fight with your partner. Are you going to have as much enjoyment? So those are some factors. It's not so straightforward. And at the same time, you don't have to. Every meal doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes meals or snacks just get the job done, and that's really okay too. Another principle is making peace with food which I alluded to earlier, and there's this phenomenon that ends up happening when you have rigid rules around eating, and you say, you forbid certain foods. I can't eat this. I can't eat that. It ends up building up a life of its own. And it's known in the research world as this restraint theory, where someone is really trying to control what they eat because they're concerned about their weight, and something comes along to break that restraint. That something could be a mood, it could be an event, it could be hunger, it could be a food. And when that restraint is broken, it tends to be all or none. It's like, well, I'm never going to have this cake again, so I might as well eat the whole thing. So making peace, what this is about, it's really about the emotional healing. And what tends to happen is that when you're on some kind of diet or food plan, food stays really very exciting because you haven't done something called habituation. Habituation is about novelty. Think about one of the best ways I've heard it described is, imagine you are falling in love with somebody, and for the first time, you hear that person say to you, I love you. And it's amazing, it's magical, you're floating. And now let's say you're in a committed relationship with this person 5 years down the road, and they say, I love you, and it's nice, but it doesn't have that same impact. So that's habituation. And we see it through all kinds of things. Think about when you get a car that's new to you, and new shoes. And after a few months or a year, it's like, it's just my shoes, just my ride. But when someone is dieting or following food rules, they don't habituate to that food. And so when they go off the diet, because it's hard to stay on any kind of diet or food plan, the rules are broken and the food is very exciting and it feels very, very scary. And then the rules get reinstituted all over again. And the other thing that ends up happening with this principle that surprises a lot of people is that when you really know you have permission to eat this food whenever you want, you get to ask yourself, do I really want this food? Do I want it now? If I eat it now, will I enjoy it? Because it's not like you're never ever going to have it again. And so it's a really fun and a really scary principle at the same time. Um, another principle is respect your body. And this is the fact that, our bodies are genetically programmed. Just like you, if you wear like a size 7 shoe, you cannot realistically expect to suddenly squeeze into a size 5 or a size 6. And the same thing when it comes to our bodies. Body diversity is a thing. And so, even if you're somebody who has a fraught relationship with your body, can you treat it with respect? And that's what this is about. It's about acts of respect. But when you're at war with your body, it's hard to want to take care of it. It's hard to listen to its messages. And the body has powerful messages. A little side note that I didn't mention, one of the ways that intuitive eating works is through something called interoceptive awareness. And that's our ability to perceive physical sensations that arise within the body. Like when your bladder's full, you can feel that. You can feel hunger and fullness. But the thing that blows me away is even emotions have a physical sensation. And so when you're connected to these messages, what it really does is help you to get into balance, both psychologically and biologically. And so another way I look at this in a way is it's like text messages from your body. It's
Mm-hmm.
listening and then responding in a timely manner. Another principle is coping with your emotions with kindness. And what this is really about is not pathologizing emotional eating. It's about expanding your toolbox for coping. And it takes people a different amounts of time to work with this principle depending on what's going on in their life and how complex it may or may not be. Can we pause for just a moment? I
Yes, of
forgot to
course.
ask. Okay, because I need to blow my nose.
Go for it.
This is the first time
All
this has
good.
ever happened. Thank
Don't
you.
worry at all. Totally normal.
Okay, good. I
You
see
are
we have some
listening to
kind of.
your body's cues to blow
There
it
you
to blow
go.
your nose.
We were talking about emotions and treating your emotions with kindness. So it's about
Yeah.
being able to identify what that emotion is and what the need is behind that. A couple other principles are. Um, oh my God, I'm blanking. Let me start with the last principle. It's
Sure.
honor your health with gentle nutrition. And the reason we made that principle last is that you can come into this with the best of intentions, and you might still treat intuitive eating like a diet, and you might treat any nutrition guidelines like a diet. So that's why we
Mm-hmm.
suggest waiting to the end on that. Another principle has to do with movement, and that is discovering and feeling the joy in moving your body. And so that should be 10 principles. I wasn't counting them, and hopefully we are there.
No, that's incredible. And, I mean, I resonate with so many of them. And I really like the one where you say to aim for satisfaction and how that
Yeah.
looks differently for different people. For example, I know myself that if I don't have crunch in my food, like texture is so important to me, I can have the
Ah,
best meal ever, the most delicious meal ever, but I will not feel satisfied by that.
oh, there you go. Yeah, it's a great example of texture. I just remembered something else, and this is, as I mentioned, satisfaction is the hub of intuitive eating. Another principle is challenging the food police. So if you're eating your
Mm,
favorite crunchy meal, whatever that happens to be, and if you got the food police, yelling, "You shouldn't be eating that," that's going to impact your satisfaction of that meal. So that's an important. They're all important principles. So yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not even going to ask you to pick your favorite. They're all so, yeah, they're wonderful. And as we mentioned earlier, diet culture and the extremes of eating are just prevalent in society, and it's almost inevitable to get trapped into it. I mean, like I said, I'd never invited it into my head, but it's there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
how do we work around that? How do we, avoid getting so trapped in it?
I think the first part is just identifying it, honestly. And so it's really just noticing where it shows up in your life. That's the first step. Another step could be in noticing how it makes you feel. Have you ever been around a group of friends where someone is coming in and talking about their latest greatest diet? No one in the friend group is really interested, and they're going on and on. That's part of that self-absorption that can end up happening. And so noticing that, so there's two issues. There's the personal diet culture, so that your own diet mentality, and then there's the outer, and that is, do you want to set some boundaries around this? And I'll tell you a funny story. Over the holidays, I got my boyfriend's mom a pound of her favorite candy, and we were over her place celebrating something else. Oh, celebrating her birthday, and she was discussing this love hate relationship. And he looks at me and he says, "Tell my mom what you always say." I go, "Really?" He served it up, and I said, "Okay."
Oh, you're put on the
Uh,
spot.
Yeah, but it was done in a nice way. I could have said I don't want to, but I did want to, and I said, I really don't look at food that way. I look at food as a source of connection, as a source of pleasure, and I would look forward to you being able to view that candy that way someday in some form. So that in this case, it's not really a boundary, but it's making kind of a comment. If you are the parent of young kids, especially, you might want to think about having a boundary around that with your friends. And that is, it's part of your family values. And that is, we don't denigrate bodies, and we don't denigrate food, and we don't talk diet talk. I don't want my kids to have any part of that. And when I've worked with young parents, they have been in the throes of diet culture, and they know that suffering, and they don't want their kids to suffer. And by the way, I realize life doesn't happen in a vacuum or in a bubble, but wouldn't it be kind of nice to know that in your home, and when you invite your friends over, wherever that is, that there's a degree of safety to the degree that that is possible? So first, to summarize, it's identifying diet culture and noticing the impact on you, noticing the impact on other people. And it's really common in the beginning to kind of be shocked by some of the things that people say, and you don't even know what to say
Hmm.
back. And so
Yeah.
then part of it might be reflecting on, oh, what might I do differently next time, so it doesn't land the way that it did, and so on. So,
Absolutely. No, you made such a good point. I mean, it's so important to create a safe space around food, especially at home with young ones,
yeah,
because
yeah.
that is the message that they have about food that they take with them through life.
It's true. And then, when it comes to friends and other people, whoever that might be, secondary friends, you never know if someone's struggling with an eating disorder, and how it can be really triggering. You have no intention of doing that, but that's what the impact can be. And so it's about thinking about other. To me, it's an act of kindness to the people around you, that you can, keep it to yourself. There was this really popular video that was posted on Instagram from Intuitive Eating Ireland, and it's entitled, I wish you would have said thank you. And this person is describing inviting friends over for this holiday. They made this special dessert. The friend had disclosed that they're on a diet. And so the person hosting the party made sure that they had plenty of foods to choose from. In this case, they were on a low carb diet. So there are all these like vegetables and low carb kinds of things. And when it came time to serving the dessert, the friends didn't say, I don't want the dessert. They went on and on about the diet. And she said, I wish you would have just said thank you.
Oh,
But it's described in such a poignant way in terms of how this kind of ruined the event. Like, we didn't really have to talk about this. Do people really need to know about these kinds of things? And so that's another form of diet culture, how that enters social spaces and so forth.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, awareness is so important.
Yeah, it really is.
So, I mean, becoming an intuitive eater, if that is even, an endpoint of sorts, it doesn't happen overnight. So, what does progress look like?
Okay, that's a really good question. And what I think is really important is no one's journey is the same, and the more complex your history, the more complex your healing. So, for example, if you're an adult and you were put on a diet at the age of 5, you're going to have a more complex relationship with your eating and your body than someone who started dieting, let's say, in high school or college. So I think it's important to give yourself the space, that it's going to take the time that it needs to take, because, as you said, you don't even know how some of these rules have come into your brain space. So part of it's an unlearning diet culture, and then it's about connecting to yourself, which really takes time. I had a patient who was very, very successful, and she was so tearful in my office that she's accomplished all these amazing things in her career, and yet she doesn't know how to eat. And so I asked her, how often in your career do you connect to your body? How often growing up did you connect to your body? How often was that valued? And for many people it hasn't. So it's like learning to ride a bike or learning to play a new instrument. You might understand the theory, but it's going to take some practice, and being wobbly is really a normal part of it. And so part of it is having a kind disposition for yourself in this. Just like when we see a kid learning how to walk, it's really quite amusing. They're bumbling all around, and they'll fall, and we're not saying, "Oh my God, you idiot, get up!" Instead, we're delighting in it. We're helping them, and if we can
Yeah.
have that same kind of mindset, and then one of the things I find really helps. Let's say you engage in some kind of eating that makes you very unhappy. you can ask yourself when you feel ready to, it's like, okay, given all the circumstances of what was going on, what might I do differently next time? And so those are some ways to move forward this in this. So in terms of what would progress look like, there's more of an ease with the eating. There isn't all of this background chatter about eat this, don't do that, or if you eat this, then you got to do this. There aren't any compensatory actions being taken in terms of exercise or skipping meals or skipping snacks and those kinds of things. And it's very gradual. And and what tends to happen, friends will say, "Oh my God, did you cut your hair?" Or "You seem so happy." They can't place it. They don't know exactly what it is. And that's what part of it is. Because again, you have more space in your life. And sometimes what happens, I've had people come in that say, "I'm going to be the best intuitive eater ever." And they want it done right now. Tell me all the principles today. And I wish it happened that fast. But to me, it's a byproduct of diet culture. Like, I'm going to follow the rules and then I'm done. And seasons change, our bodies change, circumstances change, and it's constantly a life learning. It's really a process. There's no such thing as perfection. Even our DNA mutates. So given that fact, to strive for perfection is something that is a source of suffering, and we can just look at what we want to do for the most part in terms of working on these principles of intuitive eating.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have put it better. Evelyn, I spent 4 years studying nutrition, but
Ah.
never were we once taught how to eat. And that is almost the most important skill. And I remember throughout university, my peers and myself in the course, we would, I think because we had this identity that we're studying to become nutritionists and dietitians, that we had to
Uh-huh.
eat a certain way. And
Yeah.
I went through 3 and 4 years. I mean, I love to bake and cook, but I would, use all these alternatives that were, I don't know, so to speak, lower energy and et cetera, more nutrient dense, which, can be a good and not so good thing at times. And then when I graduated and I started to work and actually saw real life scenarios outside of the textbook, I started to realize that no one can actually follow a strict diet structure. And so I started to listen to my body a little bit more. That's when I actually got into intuitive eating. And it
Ah.
was like, it's exactly what you said. I think the key word here is ease. I just felt so much ease around food. I still had the
Yeah.
committee, but I had better tools to deal with it. And I was
Hmm.
speaking to myself in, much friendlier ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of describing it. And I think part of this too is that you're not explaining your food choices to anybody. You don't have to explain why you're having an entree salad for a meal and you're an intuitive eater. It doesn't mean you're back in diet culture and all these kinds of things. That's what you do. It's interesting what you were saying about having that identity. I fell into that same trap, undergrad, grad school. And as I started getting out and about in the world, and people would ask me, or they'd be staring at my eating, or wanted me to judge their eating, which I always felt uncomfortable. I would decline on that, and I would eat in a way that a model dietitian would. I have never told anyone this story, and I remember after a couple of events, I thought, you know what? This is not satisfying, and this is way before intuitive eating. I might turn into a closet eater because I would eat what I want when I go home. It wasn't a binge, but I thought this could be problematic. And so what I started doing, if I wanted the cake or the ice cream, I'd say it, and they go, "Oh my God, is that healthy?" And I'd say, "Yeah, it's about having a healthy relationship with food. Or if I eat this ice cream, I'm finished and I'm satisfied, and that's it." And so that became actually a fun way to model a healthy relationship with the eating, and to take me off this pedestal was very, very uncomfortable. And I think we see it present day with social media in terms of look what I ate in a day. And some people have really good intentions on doing this. The problem is you don't know who's watching that video. They tend to compare, and what you eat in a day might not be what someone else needs to do, depending on their activity level, any medical conditions, and so on and so on. So it's kind of amazing how we get caught into all these games. you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I couldn't relate to that more. I mean, so I'm half Chinese and half French, and both cultures love food. And I remember,
Nice.
whenever whenever I visited family in France. And, there when you eat out, there is this, I mean, it's just the culture, right? You eat 3 courses. And I just couldn't stomach that. And I hated always having to explain myself as to why I'm just having, perhaps entree and dessert, or I'm skipping one of the courses. And it felt really tiring. And I think as a young, teenager, I felt like I had to force myself through a lot of situations.
Mm.
So that brings me to my next question, which is that, in some cultures, it's rude to, I don't know, leave food on your plate, or it's rude to say no to something when someone's offering it to you. So how do you navigate such comments at the table?
I think it's a really good question because I think we do need to be mindful of culture, and we need to be respectful of culture and cultural foods. And yet at the same time, how do we do that in a way that doesn't leave us worse off, in terms of eating in a way that feels uncomfortable? The one about different cultures viewing it very, very wrong to waste food. I've come across this a lot, especially with the people I've trained. We're in 60 countries now. And unfortunately, in many countries, famine has existed where people in that culture have a relationship to a family member who's actually starving. And so, therefore, to waste food is really viewed as very, very wrong, and as a value system, basically. And so, then my response is, well, then maybe we start serving less food, not because you're trying to control portion size, but you want to honor that value of the culture, and at the same time not dishonor whatever it is that your body is needing or calling for. And what that might mean then, if you start off with a smaller amount of food, are you comfortable having more if it's not enough? Because it might not be. So looking at all these different kinds of scenarios, and I haven't experienced a culture. Well, I have, but it's not a rule. I've definitely have experienced, both in my own life and also in the lives of my patients, this pressure to eat because someone made your favorite dish and they cooked all
Yeah.
week just for you. And so what I have found is it can be really helpful. First, just acknowledging the work that this person went to say, oh my gosh, that was so thoughtful. I had no idea. Yes, it's my favorite meal. I really want to enjoy it, but I'm so full right now. What I would love to do is take it home. And so, what that's doing, you're acknowledging their labor, you're acknowledging how much you love it, and you're saying how full you are, and you want to enjoy it. And when you're saying you want to really enjoy it, that I find really, really helps. That's one way of working with this. And depending on what is going on, maybe it's a family issue, not necessarily a cultural issue. Then it might be practicing, sticking with your boundaries. I've had some patients where if someone says, keeps offering food enough, sometimes they'll say yes just to get them to stop. And we look back and I'll say, it's kind of a mixed message that they see you actually saying yes eventually. So it's teaching them persistence. What would it be like to just calmly, and the key word is calmly, and politely say, no, thank you. No, thank you. Gosh, I'd love to, but I'm so full. No, thank you. Over and over again, like a broken record. So I like to find ways that honor culture and looking at whatever that middle way might be. And a phenomenon with diet culture, it tends to be binary, and that is all or none, black or white, good or bad, pass or fail. And so many times I'm looking at, let's find the middle way in this situation. And so that's what I'd be looking at here. Can we find a middle way that respects the culture and also respects your body? And my thought is, I think we can. I can't think of a situation where we haven't been able to find a middle way, or perhaps you have had a dilemma that you want to share in which
Yes.
there didn't seem to be a solution. Have you had that happen?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And going back on that point about cultural practices is really interesting, and I'm sure these practices are changing over time, from one generation to another. So in my parents' generation, when you're eating with your Chinese family, it is rude if you are not putting plate on your neighbor. It is rude if you're not putting food on your neighbor's plate. Like, it is you.
Oh,
It is right that you serve other people and you put food on their plate without them asking before you
okay.
put it on yours.
Wow.
And I know for my generation, we're finding that really tough because you don't even have time to say no, thank you. No one even
It's
asks you. It's just
already
like plonk,
there.
eat more.
Yeah. So how have you
But
handled that?
I've gone it. So I was raised not to waste food. So it's really, I would actually eat past fullness because I didn't want to leave anything on my plate. I actually grew up with this saying at home: the grains of rice that's left on your plate is the number of pimples your boyfriend will have on his face eventually.
Oh my goodness, I have never heard that. So that's a really good example of a cultural value being so ingrained that you've got this kind of mantra or curse, basically.
Yeah,
And
ingrained, pun
oh,
intended.
pun intended. That's right. And so, what would it be okay to bag it up and have it left over to have rice at the next meal or next snack with it?
Well, it's totally fine to bag away food, but how much food is left? Sometimes it could just be like, I don't know, just a spare rib. But I've gotten comfortable with just leaving food behind and being
Hmm.
okay with the comments. I rather hear the comments than actually just feeling incredibly uncomfortable.
Hmm. So I guess it
So,
comes down to it's a personal decision, in terms of
absolutely.
how you want to handle it. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind, and that is having cultural humility. No one can be the expert of you, of your lived experiences, your cultural experiences, and we also need, intellectual humility and all these kinds of things. And so many times it takes many minds to help figure out what might be an elegant solution to a tough situation, especially if it's been traditional.
Yeah, I like that cultural humility.
Yeah.
So next, I want to talk about the festive period, and this is where, yeah, we see a lot of cultures again, and people find it toughest to eat mindfully during these
Mm.
periods. What are some tips you have for exercising intuitive eating during the festive period?
It's interesting because you use the word mindfulness. So I want to use this as a point, and then I will answer your question directly. So one of the things I want to emphasize is that intuitive eating and mindful eating are both very beautiful models, but they're not the same thing. They're very, very different, and sometimes they're used interchangeably. Anyone who has a mindfulness-based practice will come into intuitive eating much, much sooner because it's about having awareness. And so mindful eating is about awareness of the sensations of eating, having curious awareness, and so on. So back to the question at hand. So it's fascinating to me when someone will say, "Oh my God, it's so hard to pay attention to eating when all my favorite foods come out." And so I stop. I go, "Wait a minute. So these are some of your favorite foods you only have at holiday time? Do I have that right?" It's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, wow, I would think would it be wonderful to find a way to really savor it because it's your favorite food. And so then we look at what are the obstacles, and usually it's social. They haven't seen their friends in a long time, or they haven't seen family in a long time. And so I would be looking at what are finding some ways to really focus on the enjoyment and the pleasure. And notice how different that is than things that you see maybe in social media or in popular magazines where they're talking about, well, just have one portion of each. They're talking about something external. And my thing is, let's find a way to really enjoy and savor it. And
Yeah.
maybe it's prioritizing what foods you're going to have. Maybe even you're engaged in an amazing conversation. At some point internally, you do a pause and you check in. How delicious is this food? Oh my God, Or maybe you're in a situation where it's really hard to enjoy it because your family fights when they get together or something. And so maybe you make a decision that, you know what? I love this food. I'm going to take it home with me and have it for breakfast or have it with my meal so I can really savor it and not get pulled into some of these conversations, arguments, or whatever they have to be. That's one aspect. Another aspect that I see often is the scarcity mindset and this idea, well, it only comes out once a year and I really shouldn't be eating this. And so it gets into this all or none where they eat all the things and it's so totally disconnected. So I would be looking at, can we come at this from a place of abundance? Meaning, are there other times that you could actually get this food, make this food, get the recipe, and all those other kinds of things? You might not want to. Maybe you only like eating these foods during these special holidays, but those are some ways that we can start taking a look at this. Or maybe minimally is not making any kinds of deals with yourself, no compensatory deals like, well, if I eat, and you fill in your most favorite food of the holiday, I'm just randomly going to say cheesecake. In other words, you go into the cheesecake and really enjoy it, and you don't say, "Well, if I eat this cheesecake, I got to run 10 miles." That is not unconditional permission. That creates actually scarcity mindset. So that's what I'd have people looking at is what is your thought process when you're going into this? Yes, you might be enjoying it, but let's look at what you described, Charlotte, as the inner committee. What's the inner committee saying? And let's see if we can get that committee somewhat silenced when it comes
Yeah.
to these matters and so forth. So that's a way. So sometimes I challenge my patients to go into the holidays and holiday food at really savoring their favorite food, and I'll ask, "How often have you done that?" And it's really a surprise how often the answer is, "I really haven't savored it. I just kind of." Hurry up and eat it before I change my mind. Hurry up and eat it
Hmm.
before I start the diet on Monday or whatever it happens to be. So it's changing your relationship with the foods in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have the perfect role model for someone who savors food, and that's my brother.
Yeah.
Each time he has something he enjoys, he literally closes his eyes for like a good 15 seconds.
Oh
And
my
he goes, "Well, wait,
gosh.
let me enjoy this." And the family used to laugh at it, but isn't it so great?
It is, and I have a smaller version of that. It's kind of a funny story now that I think about it. So I was in Nicaragua in a villa with 10 other surfers. We were on a surfing trip with 10 other strangers. It was amazing because we had all this stuff in common. And midweek, I'm about to take a sip of coffee. And by the way, the coffee there is amazing. And someone starts to ask me a question, and I'm there and I'm pointing to my coffee and I'm doing the same thing that your brother is doing. It's like, and I close my eyes because I love to savor the first bite. The first sip to me is the most delicious. It's the hottest. It's And anyways, I told this person that, and she had a big smile on her face. She goes, "Oh my gosh, I think I'm going to start doing that as well. That sounds like a nice little practice because it's just one taste in this particular case." So yeah, whatever
Yeah.
works for you. That's a great thing your brother's doing. I love it.
Absolutely. Have your moment with food, or your
Yeah.
favorite drink. So you touched on the scarcity mindset, and that reminded me of this one thing that I read about, and it said that upon times when you perceive fullness or when you end a meal, you start to feel sad.
Ah,
Can you explain that a little bit
yeah.
more? Does it have to do with the scarcity mindset?
Yes and no. So, if you are somebody who has had a history of dieting or rigid rules around eating, and you're just now enjoying the freedom and the ease, it really can feel sad. Like, oh, if I eat any more, I'm going to feel uncomfortably full. So you might have this internal conflict. And so what I say, it's really normal. The difference is it's really intense with someone who's had a history of a lot of deprivation. Um, I'll use myself as an example. I don't have that deprivation history. I might be disappointed. It's like, oh, I was really looking forward to having this dessert, and it's just going to be a couple bites, and I'm done because if I have any more, I'm not going to feel good. And so, one, I normalize it, and two, I might say, okay, what might be another way we can get this food? Is this something that you can have leftovers? Now, if it's ice cream, maybe not. It might not make it home. It might get all melty. Or maybe you can come back and have if it's a dessert or the meal, can come back and have it again, even if it's the next day. And working with that, and there's nothing wrong with that individual. I've had patients that there's something wrong with them because they're getting emotional about the sadness of it. And what I say is it's powerful awareness is what you're having, and when you're having awareness and when you're aware of your emotion, you're getting aware of what your needs are. And in this case, you're getting aware of, oh, I really have missed out on enjoying food for so long that I'm feeling sad right now that I'm going to stop. I'm stopping because I want to. It has nothing to do with a diet. Um, that's one way of dealing it. And I've had some patients who are just really conflicted and they'll say, but I want to keep eating. And they'll say, okay, then eat, but let's do it with some awareness if you want to. And I invite them to do it kind of bite by bite. And that is you take a bite, how's it tasting? How's your body feeling? And when you stop, whenever that is for whatever reason, I'd love for you to answer this question. How do you feel right now? Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And if you describe feeling unpleasant, what might you do differently next time? And so there's a powerful learning that happens with that, as opposed to unilaterally deciding, okay, I can't eat because I'm full. It's wrong. This way, you can kind of get curious. Maybe just need two more bites. I'll give you an example. This I'll never forget this. My son, who was 2 at the time, he's now an adult. I had made a really good meal. I remember it because um, I made all the things. And one of the things I made besides dinner was carrot cake. Happens to be one of my favorite desserts. And I served everybody the same amount: his dad, his sister, me, and him. He finishes his carrot cake and his plate is empty. And he looks at me. He says, "More, mommy." And the mommy in me was thinking, "Dude, you've had enough." And then the intuitive eater in me is like, "Let him have his cake." So I serve another piece of cake the identical size. He eats two bites, all done, and runs off to go play with his toys. So he just needed, a piece and two bites. We didn't get any of
Mm.
this push pull power struggle and so forth. And so sometimes what happens, because of the relationship you've had with eating, now with the 2-year old, there's not that much history. But if you're 30 or 25, there might be this history and all this deal making. And so it doesn't feel so easy, but it will be with time.
Absolutely. I mean, that's such a great story that you just shared there. And, for our parents listening in to this episode, how do they juggle this mommy versus intuitive eater role with their kids?
Well, a couple of ways, because there's a lot of things that come into that. Well, we're really talking is the family dynamic of the meal. Then there's the individual of the self. Um, how do you relate with intuitive eating for yourself when you've got, I had this question a lot, when you have little ones and it feels like you're up and down, and you're barely sitting down and enjoying your meal. And so part of it is looking at the moments in which you can enjoy the meal. The other thing is that, and I love this as a setup with parents. As parents, we're responsible, of course, for providing the meals, providing the snacks, and the role of the kid, the child, is how much, if at all. And that work comes from actually the work of Ellen Satter, who is both a dietitian and a therapist. I believe she's retired now. So there are ways that we can manage this. And probably one of the biggest suggestions I can give is to let go of being the perfect mommy. I can't tell you how often that comes into session. Like they're going to fail motherhood if they don't do everything exactly right. And again, now this is the theme of perfection. And one meal, one snack does not make or break doesn't make your kid's childhood. It's just the process over time and so forth. So I would be paying attention to at the table connection with your kids, connection with yourself, and the joy of that. That's a way to work through this.
Absolutely. That's such great advice.
Thank you.
And, one of the things that you shared in your book, Intuitive Eating for Every Day, is that each moment you eat is an opportunity to learn more about yourself and your
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
Can you share more about that?
Yeah. If you think about it, think about how often you might be eating and doing something else at the same time, some kind of distracted eating. You're scrolling down your social media, you're answering emails on your phone. And by the way, life happens. There are going to be times that we're going to multitask like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. The challenge, though, if you're new to intuitive eating, it's hard to self connect, with hunger, with taste, and all these things if your mind is distracted and occupied with other kinds of things. And so it's helpful if we can have an intention to commit to maybe one meal or maybe just one snack in which you're just paying attention. And you develop this sense of awareness. It's fascinating to see what transpires in, let's say, even a favorite food. And so a question I'll sometimes ask my patients is, describe to me the first couple of bites of your favorite dessert or your favorite meal to the last bites, whenever that was that you stopped. And I want to hear what that's like for you. And it's a fascinating conversation to hear their perspective, which usually aligns with the research. And it's this: there's something known as sensory specific satiety. And that is when you've had kind of enough of a food, it doesn't taste as good toward the end. It's not that it tastes bad, but the amazing kind of thing, it's not, you're not getting that amazing aspect of that. So that awareness can be cultivated. Or another thing I like to describe is that you can heal your relationship with food. You can cultivate that trust that was broken through each bite of food. Every time you honor hunger, that is an opportunity to repair that trust over and over again. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Everything done with awareness, there's learning that can happen in that time.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
at the same
And
time, I want to emphasize something. You don't have to be a monk and light a candle and meditate and then go eat your meal. Sometimes people think it's this big, arduous thing. It doesn't have to be that way. And then once you kind of really get the hang of things, it doesn't take quite as much of awareness because you have a sense of what it is that you're doing.
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, that takes the pressure off, right?
Mhm.
Earlier on, you also said it's an opportunity to explore your body. For example, if you've had a really full dinner or a really full lunch, instead of having these compensatory actions and say, I'm not having dinner, it's actually a chance to see how your body self regulates.
Yeah, and it's interesting how many times the reaction wants to be is to panic and for you to take charge and so on. And so it's a kindness to yourself, and it can be a scary moment for somebody when they're used to being very tightly conforming to rules, rigid rules. Like, well, let's see what your body wants to do. And maybe it needed that amount of lunch even though it feels too full. Let's see what ends up happening. And I'll tell you, my patients are usually very delighted. I'll never forget, I got a text message from a patient around 2 in the morning. I have a separate text number, so it never wakes me up. And she goes on to describe, oh my gosh, my body is working. And she described how she blew off an evening snack because she just didn't want to bother. And so she went to bed. And then she woke up at 2 in the morning hungry. And without thinking, she ate, and as she was walking to bed, she realized, "Oh my gosh, I had about the same amount of food I would have had as a snack. My body is so smart." So that's another thing you
Yeah.
can do in a positive way, and notice all the times that your body is working, including, let's say you have a crazy day, and let's say you had lunch at 11, but you got pulled into a meeting, got pulled in a meeting after work, and you're not getting home to 7 o'clock. In other words, it's been 8 hours till you last ate, and you come home and you eat with intensity and in a quantity that doesn't feel good. And yet that is an example of your body working because we are wired to survive famine. Yes, I'm not going to say it feels good, but that's what our body does to get the attention. It's like, oh my gosh, we don't know if she's going to feed us again. Let's seize the moment. And that's
Yeah.
that's that's what happens. And so I've had some patients say, well, I'm out of control with food. It's like, no, it's kind of like if you hold your breath for a long time. If you hold your breath for a long time, when you finally let yourself breathe, it's not a polite inhale, it's a gasp for life. And eating is the same way. Eating is essential to life, as you know. And so if we've gone too long without eating or not having enough food, our body treats it the same way. It is an inhale of the food. It's a natural compensatory thing that happens, especially if you've had a history of restricting. And it's really interesting now to see the newer studies emerging around food insecurity when you don't have enough food to eat or not enough on a consistent basis. It tracks with binge eating and with bulimia. And so I think we need to start normalizing some of these behaviors. Again, not that it feels good, but it's a normal response to a very extreme abnormal situation. We're not supposed to be going without eating as human beings, and so on. So those are
Yeah.
some things I like to look at.
I love your client's reaction there. My body is working.
Yeah, right? Yeah, yeah.
Now, it would be remiss of me not to ask the next question. And that is, how does intuitive eating fit into the picture for someone who has suffered from eating disorders?
Oh, it fits really, really nicely. It looks like it's protective with eating disorders. There was a really interesting intervention study in which they took women with disordered eating behaviors, meaning they didn't meet the criteria for an eating disorder, but they were doing things like, missing meals, under eating, binge eating, and so on. And what they found is, I think it was an 8-week intervention with intuitive eating, binge eating decreased by 70%. And so, for a lot of people, intuitive eating is kind of the missing step to a full recovery. You might have behaviorally stopped the eating disorder behaviors, but there might not be that ease in eating yet. And so it's really part of the recovery process. You're not necessarily going to be doing all the principles in the very beginning when you're in the throes of the eating disorder, but it's an important part of the healing. And it seems to be very protective from actually developing eating disorders, especially if with kids and those kinds of things. So I think it
Yeah.
bodes really well, actually.
Oh, that was so important to share. Thank you, Evelyn.
Yeah.
Yeah, what an important point. I want to talk about you now. You've got so many interesting stories, a very exciting lifestyle. Now, you had qualified for the Olympic trials in the first ever women's marathon back in
Yeah.
1984. What
Long
was that
time ago.
experience
You
like?
know what? It was really incredible. Up until that time, the longest distance that women were allowed to run in the Olympics was the 15 was basically a mile. And so when they added this, it's like, oh my gosh, I wanted to train to qualify because there's a standard you had to meet in the United States, and it was exciting to be part of history. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story with it. So in the trials, when we were running the race, you tend to get into the same pace with different runners, and I was at the same pace with this one runner, and we're just talking as we're running, we're racing, and she says, what do you do for a living? Are you a politician or something?" And I said, "No, why do you ask?" She goes, "Because you're waving to everybody." And I said, "Oh," I go, "I know that this is as far as I'm going to get because my marathon time was far away from the American record. There's no way,
Oh,
unless there was an act of God, I'd make in the top three. And that's not negative thinking; it was just kind of a fact." And I said, "I want to enjoy every moment of this, and that's why I'm waving to everybody because there's crowds of people showing up." So it was a wonderful event. When I look at that and I look at what took place to get me there, like running on the boys' track team. At the time, there were no girls. Track team at my particular high school. In fact, they didn't even make girls running clothes or girls shoes. So I ran in
mm,
boys clothes and boys clothes. Oh my gosh, boys running shoes and boys clothing. But the first time they made a pair of girls running shoes, oh my god, it felt like I was running on marshmallows. It was the best feeling ever. And so I just had the love of sports. So thank you for
I
asking that.
love
It's
that.
what I've seen is the training that it took to get into the trials, and that mindset is, even though I'm not competing like that anymore, the tenacity is still there in terms of persisting on, dismantling diet culture and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean that anecdote of like, waving at everyone and just enjoying the moment is a good reflection of how you should enjoy your meal as well.
Yeah, you can wave at your
Yeah, there you
peas.
go. Yeah. Savor it. Have a
Yeah,
moment.
yeah.
Um, I'm really curious to know, what did those first pair of running shoes for women look like?
It's the Nike Senoritas Cortez. So it was a white Nike shoe with the red swoosh. That's what it looked like.
Oh,
And then when I got into college, Nike was our sponsor, and so we would get different colors of running shoes. They were custom, and so I always felt very special. It's like, "Ooh, I got one of these special pair of Nikes." And now there's all kinds of brands and
yeah.
running shoes and those kinds of things. So
Oh, fun. I
yeah.
really like that. And on the same vein of, having such an active lifestyle, you're into surfing, hiking, ping pong. Was this always the case for you being this active?
Yeah, I'm someone who's just generally enjoyed playing, basically. In fact, when COVID happened, it shut down the ping pong place that I played at, and I wanted to find something that would give me a little bit of a thrill that I had access to. And I live near the ocean, and so I took surfing lessons and learned how to surf during COVID and fell in love with it. It's oh my gosh,
Wow.
it's the hardest thing I've ever learned how to do, and it's a very strenuous sport. I had no idea how strenuous it is, but to be on a wave is the most magical feeling. Or to be sitting on a surfboard. I was out yesterday in the water and to see these dolphins. It was like, and seeing the
Oh,
vastness of the ocean. I can get kind of transcendental in a way on just what it's like to be out there and realize how small you are just to
yeah.
the ocean, as far as the eye can see. And as we all know, it's even vaster than that. So it's a thrill.
That's incredible. And so surfing is relatively new to you then.
Oh yeah, yeah, it is relatively
Wow.
new. Yeah.
So, how many people give up on an active lifestyle or even picking up something new once they enter adulthood due to, I don't know, priorities or fear or confidence? How would you encourage people to continue remaining active and trying new things?
I think it's about the pursuit of fun. That to me is everything. Something that you really enjoy. And I think that's what helped with my frustration level, or it wasn't a frustration, my understanding level. In the beginning, I wasn't getting up on waves, but I would get just enough of a taste where I almost stood up, or you feel that actually I would do boogie boarding. So that's where you're laying, flat on your tummy getting
Hmm.
waves. And I knew the rush of that, and that would just keep me going. Even though at the time it wasn't a thrill, I had the taste of what that would be. And so, figure out what brings you joy. If you're a social person, I'd be looking at activities that have a social component components. So here in the United States, something that has really taken off is pickleball. It's very,
Mm-hmm.
very social. I'd be looking at activities that do that, or like walking with a friend or walking with a group. It doesn't have to be an organized sport, but what might give you some joy. And sometimes what happens if it's been a long time since you've been active, it can be frustrating to want to do a sport and your body is not fit yet, not yet to do it. So part of it is having realistic expectations and building into it. So one of the challenges I had with surfing, for example, was with my upper body strength to do a pop-up, and I'd see all these drills on YouTube, but they were too advanced for me. I needed like little baby steps to get there, and I eventually figured out what those baby steps were. And so maybe it's doing some research around that in terms of what might be the steps to help you get into a sport that sounds like something you would have fun doing, and being patient with yourself in the process.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good advice. I mean, break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces, and
Yeah.
for something that that you might be fearful of, break it down again, get a little taste of it, and build up that appetite to to want more.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah, for sure.
Evelyn, I really appreciate your time. I've learned so much. I mean, this entire hour has just been on fire. I've learned so much. And I just have one last question for you as a
Okay.
nutritionist and someone who loves food. I
I
got
do.
to ask you, what is a dish you haven't had for a while that
Oh.
you yearn to
Oh, I'm
eat?
gonna
I mean,
tell
it
you
could be
right now.
yeah,
It's
go for
it's
it.
a cultural food for me. I'm half Mexican, and it's mole. And mole is a sauce, and it's kind of it's hard to describe what it is. It's not sweet and it's not hot. It's amazing. And so I'm lucky I live in an area where I have access to mole. I don't have to make it from scratch. So I'll get mole enchiladas or mole chicken. But that's something that brings back very fond memories because growing up, we had mole with every holiday. Like at Thanksgiving, besides the gravy and the mashed potatoes, we'd have mole. And I realized I was different the first time I went to a friend's house at Thanksgiving and said, "Where's your mole?" And they said, "What?"
And
And
that's
I
not
explained
easy
what
to
it
make,
was.
mole.
No, it's not. It's really not.
Yeah.
And there's all these stories on how it came to be and so on. But it's quite delicious.
Oh, amazing. And where you live, what's the name of a place that you go for your favorite mole?
Oh my gosh. Oh my, I'm blanking on the name. Olamendi's. Olamendi's. Yeah.
Olamendi's. All
Olamendi's in
right.
Dana
And
Point. Yeah.
at Dana Point, did you
Oh, Dana
say?
Point, California. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I will note it down so that if any of our listeners go there, they will know to hit up that spot for some mole.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time, Evelyn. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation very much.
Oh gosh, where do I begin? That episode was incredible. It was so useful in many ways. I know I say this at the end of every episode, but honestly, it's so true. And I learned so much today. And, for those of you listening in who are looking to heal your relationship with food, to feel more control and more ease around food, I sincerely hope that was helpful for you. It definitely was for me. I have two full sheets of paper as notes. They're so messy. Um, but honestly, I'm so thankful that we managed to get Evelyn on the show. Go follow her, get her books, and I hope you learned a thing or two to practice in your everyday life today for a healthier relationship with food. Don't forget to rate the show so we can keep bringing in awesome content like this that you can enjoy and learn from. And for more nutrition content, follow me on social media and subscribe to my weekly newsletter. You can find all the links to that in the show notes. Take care. Bye bye. For the full transcript of this episode, head over to my website, thecharlottemaid.com/podcast.